My friends, today we're exploring some of the comfiest locations on the Nintendo 64, and in particular, winter locations. Like, do you recognize this ski lodge area from any of your favorite classic games? Or what about this spot here? Or this spot? Along with some more common locales. Where would be the best place to pernoctate or spend the night? Where might be the worst place? I hope you're ready to ponder, so grab a warm beverage, get cozy, and let's explore.
Here we go!
Now, my friends, do you recognize this location at all? Perhaps not, and it might take a keen eye or having played a very specific game, which I'll reveal in a moment. But here we are in some kind of ski lodge area. There's a little snowman, there's sort of a hotel or place to stay, you can park out front, get your bags unloaded. And indeed, these signs, if we can get a better look, they will say Ski Fest. Really reminds me of some kind of, Olympic village or just a ski village. We have one here called Blue Mountain. Let me know in the comments if you've ever been to Blue Mountain. Quite a remarkable place with a lot to do, a lot of skiing, a lot of town and restaurants and merriment and winter joy. This game is indeed Beetle Adventure Racing. And it's kind of in the title of the game, Adventure Racing. The whole point of the game is to go a bit off-road and explore. I've been playing it recently, and I find it to be quite a remarkable game with many comfy spots. And certainly this is one of the comfier winter spots in the game on the Mount Mayhem course. Has quite a remarkable world record history as well. Maybe we'll get into that sometime, but all these Ski Fest banners reminds me as well of not only Blue Mountain, but the wonderful town of Innsbruck, Austria, which hosted the Olympics twice in 1964 and 76, I believe. These sorts of small European or Alpine towns, we see the tram, a ski lift tram that's taking people around. Beetle Adventure Racing is interesting. You actually can't reverse or back up as far as I can tell. I've just been playing through it. But it is cool that you can go off-road and explore these locations. There's a snowman, sorry kids, just took it down. But you get the nice, evergreen trees, snow-capped. And you can just imagine checking into this sort of lodge for a ski weekend, even if you're not much of a skier yourself. Is this a place that's going to open up? Yeah, wow. See, I've never even traveled through there. Just a tiny little shortcut. Some of these are just tiny little shortcuts so we can go through the ski village and come out on the other side. And the game is chock full of these. I'm sure many have been fortunate enough to have a night in a place like this, whether it's with friends. I had similar with hockey tournaments in places like Montreal and Quebec City, these great winter cities that we ponder and enjoy here in the Great White North. Ottawa, Toronto not so much, maybe outside Toronto, but yeah, one cool thing in this spot is that here's another spot that is clearly an outlet. That building up ahead really, really looks like, the Chateau Laurier or the Chateau Frontenac in Canada, two amazing iconic hotels. So that's quite a view there, and actually we can just drive right through this sort of garage. It is another shortcut and takes us down actually to tap into that winter village feel. We get kind of a ski jump ramp, and we land out here, and that's pretty cool stuff, and you carry on with the course. So all in all, quite a comfy winter spot, and I do find it quite remarkable and amazing. One of these kind of underappreciated gems of a game, truly, and I truly mean that. I would love to get in the world record history of this game sometime. A great course overall, a great winter course, but certainly that section is one of my favorite comfy spots. Overall and all in all, on my arbitrary scale, I would say this location here is quite comfy. You could really spend a good night here, quite a good place to pernoctate, and I think you'll get up to all sorts of shenanigans, certainly if you were a younger lad. Maybe as you get older, you just want to get a good night's sleep in a nice hotel or lodge and get out to a good day of skiing or tubing or snowboarding the following day. Now I think pretty instantly, one of the most famous comfy places that comes to mind, especially a wintertime setting, is this cabin in the mountain village in The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. And we can actually make it a little comfier than it even currently is, and we do that by going inside and unfreezing the hearth. So let's go see these interesting characters and make this place a little comfier than it even currently is. With this sort of strange interaction here, let's chat with them first and see what they say. This very weird fellow in like kind of a gimp suit, I suppose. And then this guy, you know, look what he's wearing. It's very unusual. He says he's having a dream. He must be warm, but like his outfit is not exactly something that shouts warmth. You know, his shoulders and much of his chest are exposed. And it's called the Mountain Smithy. He's Zabora. I wouldn't have known if that was a trivia question. And his assistant is Gabora, obviously some kind of reference to Kapora Gabora from Ocarina of Time. And they're having an abnormal cold snap and can't do any business due to the hearth frozen over. And I think it raises the question, how is he so still warm and not freezing despite, you know, he's in this place and there's no source of warmth, no fire going on. And I suppose you can use some spring water, hot spring water, to unfreeze the hearth, or if you beat the Snowhead Temple, you can indeed use fire arrows as well. Okay, so now the hearth can go to work, but actually it doesn't start like loading and turning on until you go outside and sort of allow it to load a new property. But if we turn around and take a look now, we see there's smoke and fire emerging from the chimney, making this all the more comfier, I would say. You know, now we're in a comfy sort of Swiss-style mountain lodge, and that is truly wonderful and joyous. And we even see, you know, the windows are lit up very nicely, like something out of a sort of Thomas Kincaid painting. You know, certainly one of my favorite artists all around. What an icon. And the lighting is just so marvelous. The way you get that beautiful golden glow emerging from the cabin. This cabin I find quite interesting in that, you know, it sort of looks like it's built on what we call timbers here in Canada. No basement really, just sort of built on these strong wood planks emerging. And that's kind of neat into its own right. Yeah, now it's nice and warm and we can go inside. We see that now the cauldron, the hearth, is really, really heated up and fiery. And now you can imagine there being a good deal of warmth. You know, Buddy Boy here is still sleeping, still in that outfit, which I suppose is warmer now. How did he make it through without anything warmer on when his hearth was frozen? We don't know. We have the same kind of nonsense here. And this guy tells us that, oh, you know, he says get some coffee, which is cool. But now he says that my sword is at max strength and I can't make it any stronger. And he wants to buy for 40 rupees, even though it's something worth, you know, about 200 or something like that, worth quite a lot more. He's a bit of a cheapskate, that fella. And he says no one else will buy for 40. Well, they buy for a lot more, actually. One thing I do think is pretty cool here, it shows how advanced this game is. Like, we can see that the flames are kind of reflecting off of Link's face and clothes here. You get that sort of beautiful fireplace vibe that I certainly love. Really emanating strongly. And it is kind of one of those funny things because, you know, I do remember this place being extremely comfy, extremely joyous, especially when you get it melted finally, get the hearth going. You're going, wow. But at the end of the day, when I revisit it, it's kind of unusual because you get these two very weird dudes. This guy's a strange fellow. I suppose this is his, like, teapot, or maybe he makes coffee with that somehow. And this is his, like, is this guy like a half Goron or something? Just a very unusual character that really is not explained much at all in the game's lore. And that beautiful window from outside like has a curtain from here. We don't even see light emanating there. So just, you know, there's this foreboding chain. And so it's interesting that it certainly comes to mind as being one of the most comfy places on all of N64, especially in a winter scene, especially at night. And yet, it really is not all that comfy when I come to revisit it, you know? It's still very lovely outside. But overall, in the comfiness scale, You know, I'd still probably give it an A in terms of comfiness, just for those nostalgic vibes, but it's lacking a bit to be S tier, I would say. I mean, don't get me wrong, that's a comfy shot. That looks like a comfy place. And it certainly could be made comfy if maybe you had better house guests. Now look, could this be a comfy places in the winter video without the Frosty Village in Diddy Kong Racing? And I know I've talked about it at length before, especially in a video I made about how Diddy Kong Racing has these amazing Christmas vibes, but certainly that extends to winter. You know, Christmas and winter go hand in hand, and even though Christmas is well beyond us, still the winter vibes here are unbelievable. And I've spoken about how you can really just imagine yourself in one of these houses, maybe in the upstairs room, playing a video game with some cousins, as your parents and aunts and uncles are jovially entertaining in the kitchen or dining room down below. You know, who I hope, I know maybe some people don't have those fond memories, but you know, I hope that some do have something like that. And even if you don't, you know, maybe you're just camping it solo, hanging out in one of these houses, maybe it's your house. You can imagine on a cold, long winter's night, going outside and walking down to the shoreline by the full moon to ponder. And there are few better places to ponder as a man, in my opinion, than down by the shoreline. You know, I know we're getting this kind of unusual view here on the NoClip website, and it is ruining the immersion a little bit, but that's okay, and we're going to do so even further. But, you know, just imagine something, you know, who knows what could happen in one of those houses one night, and you say, I just need to go down to the beach and have a ponder. And it kind of reminds me of the Taylor Swift song, Snow on the Beach, featuring Lana Del Rey, where she says, snow on the beach, weird but beautiful. And it's very true. As someone who's lucky enough right now to be on a snowy beach in real life, up on the great shores of the Great Lakes, I can totally understand that feeling of, it is a strange thing to see a beach, a sandy beach that you're used to swimming in warmly, now being totally frozen. But it does bring this kind of ponderful mindset there. And I mean, look, if you had to spend the night or pernoctate anywhere on the N64 in winter, this has got to be up there. These beautiful cabins, they seem well lit. I mean, houses, really, they seem very, very well lit. And, you know, you could easily sleep. I'm sure they're full of amenities to pass the whole winter, not even just one night. But we'll ruin the immersion a tiny little bit and we'll go behind. You don't ever get this view in the real game. There's an invisible wall that prevents you from getting here. But as we'll see, you know, there is no fully loaded structure behind the houses, which is a little unfortunate, but also understandable. So that does kind of ruin the illusion a tiny bit. You can just see right through. Nothing there. The sides are built, but nothing on the back. This one here is built fully, so this one's kind of the coolest house right there. And you wonder, you know, presumably you could kind of get an angle view off towards the side of the house maybe before bumping into the invisible wall. But there you go. There's the Frosty Village, my friends, and let's climb up the hill back to the start and check out another interesting place or two on this map. So right at the start, we have this sort of pond-ish, frozen but not quite frozen area. It looks like it is moving water, even though it probably should be frozen with this temperature. This is such a cool spot, you know, you get the rare logo and whatnot. But for some reason, even though it's not totally frozen, it does remind me of these frozen lakes that I've been fortunate enough to play hockey on, you know, as a younger lad. I had a good friend a couple friends especially, but one in particular who had, you know, quite a nice cottage somewhere in the vast Kawartha Highlands. You know, if you're an Ontario lad, you might know where I'm talking about, in these inland lakes there, near places such as Coboconk or Bobcaygeon, which are real places, by the way. And he would get the pond frozen, the lake, it was a small inland lake, it would freeze, and we'd go out there and play late night hockey, pond hockey, the truest form of hockey, one might suggest. And just awesome stuff. And for some reason, this section reminds me of that, which is weird because the water is clearly moving. It's not frozen over, but you could imagine it would be the place such that it would freeze over. And just a bit of a hike from the cabins and cottages down the way. You'd come up, play hockey for hours, and come back to have a warm night. And isn't that wonderful? And lastly, on the Frosty Village, I mean, this is just such a cool spot. You know, a waterfall in the snow, and, you know, a shortcut if you're on the hovercraft mode, but just such a beautiful thing to ponder. Talk about places to sit and ponder on this map, because there are many. Frosty Village, probably the most iconic and remarkable winter location on the entirety of the Nintendo 64. Here are a few more places I wanted to mention. Frosty Peak in Banjo-Kazooie, of course. I know it gets brought up a lot in terms of comfy places, Christmas places on the Nintendo 64. I've actually been playing a bit through Banjo for the first time ever, and currently working my way through the Bubble Gloop Swamp, so I'm slowly getting there, and I'll be keen to explore, play, and ponder Frosty Peak when I get there. I'm using the noclip.website to take a look here, and certainly I can imagine it feels even comfier in-game, really interacting with all this stuff. You know, the beautiful huge Christmas tree, and all these finely lit and finely decorated little spots. It's really quite wonderful. Now take a look into the legendary Wazza's Cave as well, which feels comfy and warm in its own right. And I can actually see and understand how insane this whole ice key situation was back in the day. You know, I never really got it, the whole stop and swap thing, but now seeing how the cave is laid out and seeing the ice key right there in front of your eyes, it's just truly remarkable and truly insane. I can see how it called to so many who played the game over the years. We have a better understanding now of the entire swap and stop saga, and what was planned between Banjo-Kazooie, Tooie, DK64, and possibly more. So I can surely see why many a young lad sat in this cave, exploring, pondering for hours as to how to access the ice key, only to be led astray by the incompletion of the stop and swap feature. Alas, such is the quandary of youthful innocence. Here's another one I saw mentioned a few times, White Glacier from Bomberman 64. Now I truly have never played this game, but many mentioned it as a comfy winter place, and I do get it from the gameplay I've watched. Unfortunately, I don't have much more insightful to say, but if this was one of your favorite places or levels, tell me more about it in the comments. What comes to mind about the music, the visuals, the gameplay? It certainly seems lovely, and I just wanted to include it in here somehow. Now this place is a bit odd. It is Mickey's Speedway USA on the Alaska stage. We can see some glaciers here and advising us to drive a certain way, to be relatively cautious. You know, it's a pretty decent little kart racer made by Rare, under license to Disney, of course. I guess sort of a predecessor to Mickey's Speedstorm, Disney's Speedstorm, which is a very popular racer these days. This is really the only kind of comfy spot on this map, is this cabin, really kind of an alpine style cabin once again. Doesn't really look all that Alaska-like, I would say. You know, Alaska is kind of more square, maybe brutalist buildings and square cabins. It is a log cabin, but it just kind of makes me think it's more Austrian, European. And a big red door, you can't really access it, you can't really get in. And so unfortunately, I'll have to say that it's just not all that comfy. You know, maybe moderately comfy, some interesting tree textures kind of far off. But you can't really do much and see much, and it is kind of what it is. A few more cabins up here, but more the same. You know, there's one of the same model back there, and kind of a larger lodge here at the start point that will drive under. But, you know, you can't even really get too close of a look to it. And, you know, if we go inside, well, it's sort of actually just a road tunnel. It's not really a calm, or warming ski lodge at all. So the Alaska stage on Mickey's Speedway USA is moderately comfy at best, I would say. Now this is my pick for a winter place in the game Perfect Dark, the air base, which canonically you are exploring or trying to gain access to, a United States air base located in Alaska. And of course, Air Force One is going to fly from here to some very important meeting, a G20 type of thing in Norway or something like that, and things go awry. But of all the places, this would not be a bad place to hang out and explore and certainly spend the night. Obviously Crash Site is the next stage. You crash into a frozen northern Canadian island. Again, I have to get into that sometime, the real world locations of these places. It's an interesting topic to me. But Air Base is a cool stage. You have a building fit for diplomats and representative people to hang out, be there, and spend some time. Certainly you're in a remote location. Doesn't seem like there are many roads leading to it, so there's got to be some kind of amenities. We do see that sort of tram come up from who knows where to bring the people in the opening cutscene. And, comes from somewhere around here, down the mountain, so maybe there's some sort of village over there, who knows. But I mean, yeah, we get this nice view of this building, quite a strong, firm building, as we see many in the north are like that, which is quite cool. They have to stand up to the elements, so you kind of know you're going to have a safe spot. There's the sun, as I was mentioning. It does not exist in GoldenEye, but it does indeed in Perfect Dark. And this cave here, the textures are so, they really remind me of late Rare on the N64, similar to the kind of things you see in Banjo and DK. It's kind of funny that the game is like totally different, and yet there are these kind of similarities, at least in structure and texture of the 3D worlds. Here's the sort of tram rope, so presumably somewhere way over yonder might be some sort of town or access point. Maybe there's some more amenities there. Probably not as comfy as the Beetle Adventure Racing town, but maybe something. Or maybe not. Maybe it's just another airstrip to land people in. But something cool about this spot in particular is that if we activate the horizon scan, this is where the legendary cheese is located. And we see the piece of cheese there. There's one hidden on every stage in Perfect Dark. But the crazy thing is, and when I was exploring the game with Ace about a year ago, we actually had to consult with a Rare gamer who is, certainly an expert in Rare games. And he informed us that the cheese is not visible in the Xbox version, the XBLA version of Perfect Dark, because the structure of the glaciers overtakes the cheese. And so it's just not there, which is really insane to think. The cheese was such a funny little Easter egg they put in, one on each stage, and yet not there on the Xbox version. Alas, my friends. So we can gain access to a large facility here. We can go up the stairs, up the elevator rather, up the lift, shall we say. And there's this sort of large boardroom, meeting room. These two guys have no idea what's going on. I have a cloaking device on, so there you go. And yeah, you get a nice view of the mountains. This is certainly not a bad spot. You could make this room quite comfy if you wanted. They even added a little plant in there for us. How delightful is that? So there's a good room. If you really had to, rent this room and stay here for a winter, you could make it quite a nice little loft space, which would be quite something to do. Alright, so we steal the stewardess's uniform and we gain access to the base. And we see kind of, a secretary reception area. Not too bad of a spot. Some quite heavily armed guards. You wouldn't want to mess around too much here. But we gain access to the downstairs area, which, again, it's not very comfy per se. It's a militarized air base. We have guards yelling at us that we shouldn't have come here, girl, which is a bit strange. Just this kind of window into rock, which I always found kind of unusual. You can barely see a piece of the sky up there. So yeah, the airbase, look, if you're in far northern Alaska with not much around, it sure beats the cabins on surface. There's certainly a lot more amenities here, but it's far from amazing, you know? Overall, I'd have to rate this place as not all that comfy, but it'll do in a pinch. Well, that'll do it, my friends. Thank you all for watching. Thanks to the Patreon members and channel members for all of your support. Stay true, stay cozy and warm, and I'll see you in the next stream, video, or fireside.